Bit of background on who I am. So my name is Lucy. I am a public health specialist by background, but I've worked for a long time in the world of transport and built environment. I developed something called the Healthy Streets approach, which you all know all about soon. And I work with lots of different cities. I'll show you some pictures from different places around the world as part of this talk this evening. And I deliver training and tools and consultancy to support others who are trying to deliver this Healthy Streets approach. It's going to be a slightly provocative talk this evening, but we'll start off with what is Healthy Streets. So it is very simply this colourful diagram here, 10 indicators that describe the essential criteria for a street to be fit for human beings to use. So in the four corners of our circle, we have the four biggest negative health impacts that street environments have, and they're largely related to the dominance of motorised vehicles. So air quality is top left. Severance, the issue of making it difficult to get where you want to go, is represented by easy to cross in the top right. Not too noisy, noise pollution, bottom right. And people feel safe, which is about personal safety and also reducing injuries, bottom left. At the top and the bottom of the circle, probably the most important part of what we should be trying to achieve with our streets, which is making sure that they are accessible for everyone to use and that everyone feels they have the choice to be able to walk or cycle if they want to. And around the edges of the circle, we have a range of other basic human needs that we should expect on every single street everywhere in the world. So we should have a relaxing environment which is visually engaging and interesting and people have a purpose for being there. We need places to stop and rest, and we need shade and shelter from the weather. And these 10 Healthy Streets indicators describe fundamental things we need to deliver for people, but they also describe how it feels to be on a street. And this framework has been developed to make it really easy to talk to people about how their streets might not be meeting their needs at present. Because we each have one brain in our one body and we experience everything at once when we're out on the street, we can't really pull these indicators apart and say, well, this thing I'm doing is affecting that one indicator. Any change we make will affect multiple Healthy Streets indicators. So if we were to put in a new crossing facility, people would feel safer. That might mean that they were more likely to walk or cycle a short journey. That might mean they don't use a car so that air quality could improve. The environment feels more relaxing and more people will come out and start walking and cycling and the street will become easier to cross further. So, Healthy Streets approach is a framework for how we look at all of our decision making, and often people focus primarily on the design of the street. They look at decision making around design. But most of the streets that we're using today and that we've been using 50 years ago and that we will use 50 years into the future already exist, and we have very little opportunity often to shape the design of them. So we have to think also about how do we manage these spaces and how do we use them. So Healthy Streets is looking at the design, the management and the use of our streets. Where do we need this approach? Well, it's not something that is the preserve of the city centre or the heritage area of a town. It should be anywhere where human beings need to be. These are basic human needs that we're looking at addressing. So if we have a street environment where people need to be to walk and to cycle, then we need to meet their needs. And here's some examples of different streets in different places around the world. I find that a lot of people assume shopping street or city centre street when they think about healthy streets. But actually, our residential streets make up the majority of the streets that we use day to day, and they're just as important for meeting our basic needs. We also need to think about our connector roads, and we also need to think about our primary traffic routes. This may not look very lovely or very loved, but people wait for the bus here. People walk along here in the middle of winter in the pouring rain and the dark, and people even cycle along this. So we need to make sure their basic needs are met in all these different kinds of environments. And when we think of London, we might not think rural, but even in London, we have streets that look like this. So we need to think about how do we adapt this approach to all these different kinds of streets in different places. The delivery of healthy streets is complex, and we're going to look at this in a bit more detail. It's not just something for the highway engineer to be dealing with, it's not just something for the transport planner. To deliver those 10 Healthy Streets indicators, we need some partnership working between lots of people from lots of different sectors. So The obvious candidates would be transport and planning, but policing, education, public health, the politicians, the architects, the police, the judicial system, servicing and logistics, maintenance, construction, anyone who's got any stake in how a street is designed or managed or used needs to understand why we're doing things differently and what their role is in that, and also how are they going to benefit from it. So delivering this whole system change to how streets look and feel is a big task, and London's quite unique in that it was probably the first city in the world to really start taking that connection between transport and people's health seriously. So let's look back at where London has been over the last decade. In 2014, Transport for London published Improving the Health of Londoners, which was an action plan on how the transport sector in London was going to start addressing public health issues. And it was very much a unique approach that other cities have started to follow, but none have done it in quite the same level of depth that London has in terms of that commitment of the transport sector to their role in improving people's health. So this was under the previous mayor, Boris Johnson, that this was published, and then a new mayor came in 2016, Sadiq Khan, and he really doubled down on that commitment to health. He had a particular focus on air quality, but in his first publication, A City for All Londoners, he really set out how important it was that we think about people's health in our decision making. So following on from that, the initial response is one that you often see when there's a change in policy direction, which is that everyone looks at what they're doing already and tries to see what fits with the new agenda. And this happened in London. So the pipeline of major projects that looked like they kind of fitted with Healthy Streets got relabelled as Healthy Streets projects. And one of the most well-known is this one in Aldgate Square, where you can see Gyratory was reconfigured to allocate much more space for people who are walking, cycling and spending time. And I was slightly dismayed by this because I was worried that this is where it would stop, just rename the existing projects and not really thinking about how many different people needed to now be involved in doing things differently. But we moved on. 2017, as a precursor to the Mayor's transport strategy, a document called Healthy Streets for London came out. And if you want to look at the policy around healthy streets in London, this is the shortest way of getting a handle on what was thought and what the idea was, what the plan was back in 2017. And then came the Mayor's transport strategy in 2018. And the headline figure in the Mayor's transport strategy was that London was going to have a massive shift away from private car use for discretionary short journeys, and more trips would be done on foot and by bike and by public transport. And the goal was to move from 63% of journeys in 2015 done by walking, cycling, public transport, and move that up by 2041 to 80% of journeys. So this was the headline goal, and the framework for delivering it was Healthy Streets. So the Healthy Streets framework is right at the front of that document and all the way through it, saying this is how we're going to achieve that mode shift. Of course, transport can't do that on their own, and planning needed to be involved. So the London Plan has an excellent policy in it to ensure that all new developments are aligned with delivering that goal, and in particular, that new developments need to demonstrate how they deliver improvements that support the 10 Healthy Streets indicators in line with Transport for London guidance. So really, really important that transport and planning are working together, and that's what's been happening in London, and the London Plan came out in 2021. So what we're going to look at now is what happened next. London, as I said, is somewhat unique in the approach that they took in terms of joined up policy making. So it wasn't just that the spatial plan and the transport strategy were aligned with Healthy Streets. Every statutory strategy from every department in the Greater London Authority managed to articulate through their strategy how they were going to deliver Healthy Streets. So we really got that joined up cross-sector working where health and policing, housing, environment, culture, everyone said this is what we do as our part of delivering the Healthy Streets vision for London. So we're going to have a look at a few graphs now, but I'll get past them very quickly. If you're not into graphs, don't worry. First of all, this is purely my own opinion, what I think has been going well. This is Sadiq on a bike. This was his former Deputy Mayor for Transport, Heidi. They have been building cycle tracks on those roads that are carrying too much traffic and traffic that's too fast for people to mix with cars and vans when they're on bikes. They've been building cycle tracks. They've been responding to that increasing demand for e-micromobility and looking at how they can support the people who want to be using e-scooters and e-bikes. For me, the thing that makes London stand out from other global cities is their policy around 20 mile per hour speed limits on the Transport for London road network. I've seen lots of cities doing good stuff on little streets, but that's a really bold step to say this strategic route is moving through a place where there are lots of people walking and cycling and spending time, and therefore it is not appropriate for motorised vehicles to be going above 20 miles an hour. So I think that's probably the thing London should be most proud of on a global scale at the moment. Swiftly followed by the leadership that they've shown in terms of direct vision standards on vehicles. So this is a cement mixer, and 20 years ago, a cement mixer, if you were walking anywhere near that or cycling anywhere near that, the person driving the cement mixer would not know you were there. But we have standards that were set for London and are now being followed all around the world to try and change the design of these bigger vehicles to make them much safer when they're having to go through places where there are people walking and cycling. For the Mayor, his main focus was on the ultra-low emission zone, and it has had a big impact. So the ultra-low emission zone is another thing that London's really been focused on the last few years. And the last one I'm going to mention here is about maintenance. So maintaining our network and making those opportunities to make small improvements all across the city is really an important part of delivering healthy streets. And I've been working with TfL's maintenance team for the last few years to look at how we can take opportunistically ways of improving the streets around London. So that's another thing that I think London should be praised for, and other cities look to London to learn from as well. It's not all about TfL though. The boroughs have been doing lots of good things too. So one of them is working with developers to make sure that new developments that are coming forward are delivering the kinds of things that we want to see. So higher density, mixed use, low car parking, good connectivity into walking and cycling networks, all the things that people need. They've also been looking at innovative approaches to supporting people who are using cars less or owning cars less. This is an example from Hackney of cargo bike hire. So if you need to take some waste to the dump, if you need to help someone move house, if you've got a big birthday cake to take somewhere, you can go and pick up one of these bikes for that heavy load rather than having to buy a separate bike for those few journeys that require more capacity. 20 mile per hour rollout across London boroughs continues, which is fantastic. There is work to try and make sure that shift to electric is done as sensitively as possible. It's variable between the boroughs, but there is at least some work going on to try and make sure that we can support people to shift to electric motorised vehicles. Low traffic neighbourhoods, I think there's more than 100 now in London, low traffic neighbourhoods, and they've transformed large areas of inner London in particular and made a real difference for people. And school streets, there are more than 600 school streets, whereas I think 5 years ago we probably had a handful. So really rapid change across large parts of the city to make sure that children can walk and cycle on safe routes to school. And there's an organisation, a kind of a coalition of advocacy organisations called the they deliver something called Healthy Street Scorecard, and this is what it is. Once a year they publish a nice colourful map to say, here's how the different boroughs are doing at delivering the policies that are in the Mayor's transport strategy. So the lighter coloured ones in the middle, you can see Islington, Camden, Hackney, Southwark. Those are the ones that are making the most progress in delivering the policies in that Mayor's transport strategy. It's very variable across London as to how they're all performing, but it's good that they're being held to account and that we're tracking how are things going. So how about if we zoom out and look at a London level? The goal was, in the Mayor's transport strategy, that by 2041, 80% of journeys would be done on foot, by bike or by public transport. The baseline that was set was 2015. when we had 63% of journeys being done by these modes. Here we are today, exactly the same amount. So yeah, we had a pandemic, but something big needs to change if we're going to start heading up now with this trajectory towards 2041. And of course, from a health perspective, we can't wait till 2041. 2041 is the goal that is set by an astute mayor and some clever policymakers. But if you look at the health needs in London, we needed to be there 15 years ago already. So for me, there's a real urgency for us to get ahead in terms of this particular goal. And then there are some sub-targets within the mayor's transport strategy. One of them is on physical activity. So there is a goal that every Londoner should be doing 20 minutes of walking or cycling a day. It's the first city in the world to set a physical activity target in a transport strategy, and it's not going great so far. Traffic injuries, obviously we need to massively reduce the harms of road danger if we're going to get more people out walking and cycling. Traffic injuries are pretty much where they were before the pandemic as well. But air quality is a much more positive story. So when we put our minds to things, we can make a change, but there's definitely still a lot of work to be done. I produced this thing called a Healthy Streets Index, which produces a map of a whole city. And this is London, Greater London. Every street is colour-coded red, yellow or green, depending on how healthy that street is. And it's looking at quite a strategic scale in terms of healthiness. It's looking at things like land use mix and density, street network connectivity, the population density, the ratio of footway space or pavement space to carriageway space, the levels of traffic, air quality, noise, and tree cover. So it's not looking at the granular details of each individual street, but it's just saying in terms of good planning and good strategic policy making, how are we doing? And the reason I make these maps is to help decision makers to not get too fixated on small individual projects, to take a step back and go, we've still got a lot of work to do. But you can zoom in and look at individual streets. So this is one of the highest scoring streets in London, which is Bonington Square in Lambeth. It scores 84 out of 100. Don't be distracted by the blue sky and the jolly red chairs and the very expensive paving. None of those go into the score. This is just looking at the basics of the street network, traffic levels, land use density. Those are the things that are feeding in to this location getting a high score. But we've got other inner London locations that do not fare quite so well. So this is in Newham, one of our lowest scoring streets, and it gets 28 out of 100. And you might look at that and go, well, that's not really a street. This is a public transport station right here. This is a pavement people are walking along. They need all the same things that they need on any other street. They need safety. They need to be able to get where they want to go and see where they're going. They need lighting and seating and all of the things that they need everywhere else. So we've got a long way to go, and this kind of infrastructure is just not appropriate in the middle of a global city. So we've got to think about how do we unpick some of those previous decisions that were made. Some of you, maybe some geographers in the room, might know where this is before I tell you, but you may have been on a weekend break to Barcelona, and this is the Healthy Streets Index for Barcelona. It's a bit smaller space than Greater London, so it's an easier index to look at. And a lot of people say to me, oh, Barcelona's lovely. And I said, oh, you've been there? And they say, yeah. And I said, I think you went to that green bit there. Yeah. Every European city that's got an old bit that was built before cars has a little green bit. Everyone goes there on holiday and has a lovely time. And that's marvellous. But if you're responsible for the health and well-being of all people in Barcelona, you've got to think about every single street that anyone might go on. If you've heard about the super blocks, that's this area over here, and they've definitely been showing that they can make their streets healthier. So they've been going from yellow to green with the kinds of policies they've been putting in place. But there's still a lot of red. A lot of parts of this city are still too dominated by traffic. So we use these big scale plans to help us to look at, are we doing enough? And I would say that's really what we need to be thinking about is, I don't think we're doing enough. We're not doing it fast enough, and we're not doing it on a big enough scale. So what needs to change? Well, The whole system needs to change, which is a bit of an overwhelming thing to say, but all these different bits of the system, all the different individuals that feed into every decision need to be looking at things from the perspective of meeting those basic human needs in the Healthy Streets indicators. And we're not there yet, and you can see evidence of it wherever you walk, wherever you cycle, whenever you're waiting for a bus. You will see evidence that we are not joining things up and we're not prioritising people on our streets. Not enough. So we've got loads of great stuff going on. All the things I mentioned already, we need to do loads more of them. But I thought I'd share with you some thoughts that I had on other things that we could maybe be adding to the list as well. So I'll start off with getting the details right. Here's something that I'm sure all of you will have experienced at some point. The road's been dug up, maybe to do something nice, to make it easier to cross the street or to improve a cycleway. But while that's happening, no one's planning for the needs of the people who are walking and cycling in that environment. So this picture on the left, they're putting in a side road entry treatment to make it nice, smooth, level surface for people walking across the side road. Wonderful. But while they're doing it, there's no plan for how you're going to get along that street. And then this one here, the main east-west cycle superhighway across central London. You can't put up a sign saying cyclists dismount, partly because they're not going to anyway, so why bother? But why aren't we providing them with an alternate? Can't just tell people to get off. A lot of people say we don't have enough money to do new things and different things, and I see money being spent every day in a slightly thoughtless way. So here's an example. This is a pavement that was completely rebuilt, brand new last year. No one thought before they told the contractor to go out and build it that they would just check that there was actually a continuous pavement that people could move along. So you start over there under the bridge, you walk along, and then it disappears. Great if you're fit and brave and you can step up and step down, but the pavements are first and foremost for those people who feel a bit more vulnerable on streets, and we're not providing a continuous surface for them. Really small things, and I can assure you no one's going to go back and fix that. That's done now, probably for another 30, 40 years. It will just be left like that. A completely useless waste of money. Tiny little details that aren't quite right tell you that some of the people who are engaged in the process aren't looking at it from the perspective of basic human needs. So here's the side road entrance I showed you was being constructed earlier on. Can you see what the issue might be? A bollard right on the desire line of anyone who's walking up this street. So I complained and they moved it. But I'm not always there to complain and get them to move the bollard slightly to one side so that people can actually walk in a straight line. But if someone's not there to pick up on these little details, then they sit there as a nuisance and as an annoyance for anyone who's going along that street for years and years to come. Another topic that I think needs a bit of a revisit is thinking about signage. So I remember about 10, 15 years ago, there was a big focus on decluttering streets in London. And in the interim, it's all started creeping back in. And the nature of our streets and what we use them for has changed. So this is Upper Street in Islington. It's a 20-mile-per-hour street. We expect people to drive at 20 miles per hour on this street, but we have guard railing down the middle of it, and we have this enormous signage, which is obviously taking up a huge amount of the footway space. I think a lot of our signage could be rethought in the context of our lower speed environment that we now have. And here's another example. This one, it's straddling and slightly blocking a cycle path. So yeah, we've got this all over London, signs that could possibly be revisited. And I look at other cities in other parts of the world to see how they're doing. I do a lot of work in Austria. This is Vienna. This is a very similar street to Upper Street in terms of what it's doing for the city in terms of carrying traffic. They've also made it a lower speed environment, but they do not have the same amount of signage blocking their footpaths as we do. They have loads of signs, but just not on the same scale as us. So why can they do it and why aren't we doing it? It's definitely something I think someone should be taking a fresh look at. One of the most basic things for ensuring that streets feel comfortable and relaxing for everyone is ensuring that we have a clear level space for people who are walking and wheeling. And when I look around and I see these wide splayed entrances to car parks and servicing areas for vehicles, I think, does it have to be like this? This is a multi-storey car park in Budapest, and look at the size of the entrance and the steepness of the ramp so that they can ensure they maintain that level footpath for people walking along. Do you think, oh, maybe it's just some weird quirk, maybe it's just Budapest? Oh no, go to Barcelona, another multi-storey car park. Again, the vehicles are crossing over the pavement, but it's been designed to prioritise the people who are walking, not the vehicles that are turning in and out. This is the kind of thing that I would really like us to fix. Small things that make a big difference to people and that they hopefully would never even notice have just made their everyday life easier. Something I love is the proliferation of the raised inset parking bays. I've seen them over the last decade in London move to lots of new boroughs as different people try them and find that they work. What I like about the raised inset parking bay is that if we have to have parking bays on our streets, at least if there's not a car in it, let's make it useful space for the people who are walking. And if we decide in the future that we don't really need to have that as a parking space, we've got some ready-made pavement. So small changes in the detail of the design make a big, big difference to that street and also how fit for the future it is. I think you can judge a city on where the crossing facilities are and how long you have to wait to cross, and I don't think London does too badly compared with a lot of its peer cities. But the mid-block crossing is quite an elusive one. There are not many streets in London, particularly residential streets, where people have bothered to think about the fact that you need to have a mid-block crossing. This is a low traffic neighbourhood that I worked on in Southwark, and as part of putting in the traffic filter, we made sure that we added a mid-block crossing. So whenever we get the chance, we should be making sure we're giving people the opportunity to cross a street in the middle, rather than having to walk all the way to the end, cross and come all the way back again. Another thing that I see done really well elsewhere is tight intersections with direct crossings on the desire line. So this one is from Vienna, and this one is from Tokyo. And you honestly, in terms of design, it's very hard to tell those two cities apart on different sides of the planet. So this makes a big difference to people. It makes it safer for people who are walking and cycling. It calms the whole environment down, tightening up those corners and putting the crossings on the desire line. Probably the biggest challenge for London over the next decade is going to be what we do with our curbside space. It is currently largely used for storing private cars. We need that space for so many other things. For a start, most of our pavements aren't wide enough for the people who need to use them. We need to plant a whole load of trees and we've got nowhere to put them. We need to potentially be putting some electric charging facilities in on our streets. We can't dump everything in the already limited walking space. We need seats. We also need cycle storage. So if we want more residents to be able to cycle, we need to make sure they've got somewhere safe and secure to lock their bike. So this is one borough in London where they're rolling out on-street cycle storage, but it's by no means uniform yet. And it's possibly only an interim measure because that space is probably needed more urgently for planting and greening to cool down our street environment. So how are we going to handle the growing need for cycle storage if we're not going to be converting our curbside space? Here's a little car park for bikes in a small plot of land in quite a dense urban block in Japan. And they also do the same for car parking as well. Very small sites, but they can store a few cars in. That means that we don't have to have a whole line of cars along one residential street. We really need to have a little think in this city about what we're going to do to move car and cycle parking from the curbside so that we can use that for other activities that need to happen on the street. I mentioned seating once already. This is someone who's sitting on the control box for a traffic light in the absence of an actual seat being provided. Most streets in London do not have any seats on them. Every street in London needs to have seats on it. So this is an issue that has been discussed for decades and still we never move forward and just make sure that we're providing regular seating that we know we need to make our streets accessible. This is a street in Tokyo where not only have they built an area out of the flow of where other people are walking, but they've even provided a range of different kinds of seating and some of it's got shade cover. That level of priority for people to have space to stop and rest is not happening at the moment in our planning, either for walking or for cycling. And we do have a lot of trees being planted, which is in contrast to a lot of other cities that I work with, but they're often being planted right in the middle of an already too narrow footway. And we need lots of trees to provide that shade cover, but while we're waiting for them to grow, and in the places where we can't put trees, we need to think what alternatives we've got. This is an example from Western Australia, where I do a lot of work, and they've got a much more acute sense of the need for shade on their streets, and they use canvas sails. These can be used as an interim measure while you're waiting for the trees to grow up. Another recent phenomenon in London that we're not quite on top of is managing the growth of dockless cycles and e-scooters. Still, our footways, our pavements are being used as a dumping ground because we haven't made the space elsewhere and we're not managing it properly. So boroughs are doing their very, very best, but we need to be doing a lot more and a lot quicker to get on top of this issue. This is an example from Budapest of e-scooter parking. We have these kinds of things in London, but we don't have enough of them, and we don't couple them with a strong enough enforcement to prevent anyone putting them on the footway. And then my last set of ideas for things we could be doing more of is things that probably are for a more strategic level of thinking. One of them is waste collection management. So a common sight in London that we're all too used to is our pavements cluttered with bins and rubbish. And that blocks the paths and means anyone who's travelling with children, trying to have a conversation with someone or using any kind of mobility aid is really going to struggle to get along a lot of our streets. I thought I'd share the example from Toxteth in Liverpool. It's not pretty, but it's an interesting step forward from just shrugging and saying that's how things are. They have put these large bins at the end of the street. Everyone has to bring their rubbish down to these bins where it's collected, rather than the waste collection vehicles going all the way up every street to each individual house to empty a wheelie bin. I'm sure that if this is working well, they can find a more elegant design solution than bright blue plastic boxes, but at least they are keeping their footpaths clear. So what are we going to do in terms of managing waste? Another big strategic issue is public toilets. We need them all over every borough for streets to be accessible and welcoming for all. This is a very picturesque but not at all accessible public toilet in Tokyo. They have absolutely tons of public toilets. They're safe, they're well looked after. I don't know how they can pay for it, but we need to think, what are we going to do? Because we can't just shrug and say we're not doing anything, because it means that our streets are not accessible and a lot of people are dependent on a car because we can't provide them with this kind of service. And then this one is something that I've seen in the last 5 years. I think this has come since the Mayor's Transport Strategy was even written. The growth in vehicle size has just been phenomenal. And of course, the streets aren't getting bigger, the parking spaces can't get bigger, and as a result, we are all getting squeezed by these bigger vehicles. They're more dangerous, they're more polluting, and they make it possible that you can walk all along a street and not be able to see the other side of it to see if there's any other people there. So we need to think about our vehicle size. And going back to Japan, again, because this is something they do really well, they have vans and sport utility vehicles that are absolutely tiny compared with ours. So it is possible, but we seem to have set some rules in place that mean that people can sell and buy as big a car as they want, and the responsibility for managing that massive vehicle in the public space is left to no one. So those are my thoughts, provocative ideas, and I'll hear what you think of them soon. But I thought maybe you're interested in healthy streets and want to know what more you could do. So finally, just going to wrap up with a few things on what you could do if you want to get more involved in healthy streets. There are absolutely tons of healthy streets tools that you can use. They're all for free, available at healthystreets.com. And if you're not sure which one you need, I've made a very complicated flow diagram that you can follow your way through to work out which is the right tool for the job. The one that I thought might be of most interest to you is the Healthy Streets Design Check. So this is a spreadsheet tool intended for designers. So when you've got the opportunity to redesign a street, you can meticulously measure every element of it to make sure that you're delivering a healthy street environment. You can assess an existing street or you can assess a proposed design, and it gives you a score out of 100. So I'm picking a local street to show you how it works. This is King Street, which is not too far from here, recently redone by City of London. The results of the design check show you that circular diagram that you saw earlier on with this starburst in the middle, which shows you how much healthier the street is after it's been redesigned. So with this particular street, King Street, it was scoring 40